My name is Eli Russo, 32 years old from New Haven, Connecticut. She gave me away like I was a mistake, then built a perfect life without ever looking back. But when I uncovered her secret empire in the heart of New Haven, I didn't scream. I exposed her. Silently. This is the story of how the forgotten son became her downfall. Ever wondered what you'd do if you uncovered a life your family tried to erase you from? This is a true story of betrayal, secrets, and quiet revenge set in the heart of urban Connecticut. Subscribe for more gripping narrations that prove the past always finds a way back, like if you've ever searched for answers. Welcome back to the story. The envelope was smaller than I expected. Plain, white, official looking. Connecticut Department of Public Health stamped in blue across the top. It felt too light for what it carried. I hesitated before opening it, sitting on the edge of my one-bedroom apartment in East Hartford. I'd requested my original birth certificate 2 months earlier, after the state passed new legislation allowing adoptees full access. I had no real expectations. Just a quiet ache that had lived inside me for as long as I could remember. Growing up, Joan and Martin Langley were good to me. Better than most foster parents, I'd come to learn. But love doesn't always erase the feeling of being a placeholder. Of being chosen as a second-best version of someone else's life. They never spoke much about my birth parents. "You were a gift," my mother used to say. "The best surprise we ever had." I nodded, smiled, but I always knew better. The glue on the envelope peeled back easily. Inside, a single piece of paper. Cream-colored. Heavier than standard copy stock. I unfolded it slowly, my fingers shaking just slightly. There it was, name of child at birth, Elijah Andrew Russo, mother's name, Pamela Louise Russo, mother's age at time of birth, 24, address, 226, Chapel Street, New Haven, Connecticut, occupation, freelancer, father's name, left blank. My eyes froze on her name, Pamela Russo. It was the first time I'd ever seen it written. The woman who carried me, birthed me, then signed me away. The woman I had imagined in 1,000 different ways, now suddenly real. Tangible. With a full name and an address. Not a ghost. Not a question mark, Russo. I mouthed the name like a secret. It sounded ordinary, almost too easy to overlook. But in that moment, it hit harder than anything I'd felt in years. The address was even more jarring. Chapel Street. Downtown New Haven. I knew that neighborhood. Old brownstones. Art galleries. Yale spillover. Expensive. Not exactly the place I imagined someone too broke to keep her child would live. I reached for my laptop, a quick search pulled up a match almost instantly. Pamela L. Russo, age 50, listed as an owner of property on Chapel Street. No picture, but I had a name, an age, and a location. My chest tightened. She was still there, still living in the same building she'd listed the day I was born. The paper trembled in my hand. I placed it on the table, staring at it like it might change. But it didn't. It just sat there, quiet and heavy, like a door I wasn't sure I wanted to open. I didn't know it yet, but that name on the page, Pamela Russo, was more than my beginning. It was the thread that would unravel everything. I didn't sleep that night. Pamela Russo's name looped through my head like a bad melody. I stared at the ceiling, wondering what she looked like, if she ever thought about me, if she regretted giving me away. My fingers kept drifting to my phone, itching to search again, to pull up that address one more time, as if something new would appear. By morning, I had made a decision. I drove down to New Haven just after noon. The summer traffic along I-91 was thick, but my mind was thicker with thoughts. I rehearsed what I might say. "Hi, I'm Elijah. Your son." Or maybe I'd keep it simple, "Why?" When I turned onto Chapel Street, I almost missed the address. 226 sat wedged between a boutique wine bar and a yoga studio. The building was a restored Victorian brownstone, deep red brick, ornate trim, and bay windows that looked like they'd seen everything and still refused to blink. I parked and sat in the car for 5 full minutes before getting out. the buzzer panel was old, labels worn off. I pressed what I thought might be hers. Nothing. I tried again. Still nothing. I was about to leave when a delivery guy came up the steps with an armful of sushi containers. He barely looked at me as he opened the door. I slipped in behind him without asking. Inside, the building was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of quiet you find in museums and mausoleums. Her apartment was on the 3rd floor. I climbed the staircase slowly, my breath loud in the stillness. I knocked once, then again, footsteps. A pause. The door opened halfway. She stood there in a slate-gray blouse, tailored slacks, and bare feet. Mid-40s, but sharp-featured, polished. Her hazel eyes scanned me like a barcode. Yes. Pamela Russo. I managed. Yes, she said, guarded. Can I help you? I swallowed. My name is Elijah. Elijah Langley. I think you're my birth mother. Her eyes flickered. Not wide with emotion. Not even surprised. Just flickered. She studied me a beat longer, then opened the door the rest of the way. You'd better come in. The inside was even more pristine. Hardwood floors, a velvet sofa, bookshelves lined with color-coordinated titles. It didn't feel lived in, it felt curated, like a set. She offered no hug, no tearful reunion. Just sat on the edge of the couch and sipped a glass of white wine like she'd been expecting me eventually. So, she said flatly. How much do you want? I blinked. Excuse me? Everyone wants something when they show up unannounced. I don't want money, I said. I just wanted to know why. She sighed. I wasn't ready. I was broke. Alone. Your father was long gone. It wasn't a decision I lost sleep over. No apology. No warmth, just a dismissal wrapped in cool detachment. I left 20 minutes later, more hollow than when I'd arrived. The woman who gave me life had nothing left to give me. Not even a reason worth holding on to. The ride back to Hartford was a blur. Pamela's cold, polished voice echoed in my head like the ticking of a silent clock. It wasn't a decision I lost sleep over. Not ready. Broke. Alone, that's what she said, but everything about that apartment said otherwise. The velvet furniture, the designer fixtures, the imported art. Maybe she was struggling when she gave me up, but she didn't look like someone who had stayed down for long. I told myself to let it go. Closure, after all, wasn't always warm. Sometimes it was just a clean break. Still, something didn't sit right. The next day, I searched her name again. This time, I dug deeper. A few old newspaper mentions. A donation to an arts foundation in New Haven. A LinkedIn profile that hadn't been updated in years. But then, something new, a tagged photo on Instagram. It was buried, tucked into the feed of a New Haven event planner. A charity gala. The caption read, "Such a joy to see Pamela Russo and her daughter Juliana supporting tonight's youth scholarship drive." #mother-daughter goals. Daughter. I stared at the photo. Pamela was in a navy evening dress, her signature wine glass in hand, smiling that same cold smile I'd seen just a day earlier. But standing beside her was a young woman, maybe 19 or 20, with golden hair, clear skin, and the kind of confidence you don't learn, you're born into it, Juliana. I clicked through more tags, more photos. There she was again. At a Yale mixer. Volunteering at a political fundraiser. Studying abroad in Spain. Always smiling. Always in the center of the frame. Pamela hadn't just moved on. She'd started over. She didn't give up motherhood, she just gave up me. That was the gut punch. The moment I stopped feeling confused and started feeling furious, she hadn't been too young, too poor, or too lost to be a mother. She just decided I didn't fit the picture. Maybe I reminded her of a mistake. Maybe I didn't look the part. Or maybe she didn't want the hassle of raising a son with no clear future, but her daughter. Her real child, it seemed, Juliana, got everything. The privilege. The pedigree. The support, all the things I'd scraped and bled for. That night, I printed the photo. I stared at it for hours. Not because I was jealous of Juliana, but because that image was proof. Proof that the story I'd been told, the lie she repeated so effortlessly, was just that, a lie. Pamela Russo hadn't lost sleep over giving me away because she never wanted to remember I existed. But I wasn't going to let her forget. I folded the picture in half and slipped it into my wallet, not as a keepsake, as a reminder. The woman who gave me life had built a perfect one without me in it. Now I wanted to know everything about how she did it, so I could take it apart. Piece by piece, once I saw through the lie of Pamela's I had nothing speech, I couldn't stop pulling at the threads. There was something beneath that polished exterior, something slick, controlled, too rehearsed. You don't become that cold without hiding something, so I kept digging. Juliana's social media hinted at more than just privilege. Fancy brunches with women twice her age. Events held at private clubs. Mentions of names I recognized from Connecticut's political landscape, senators, developers, board chairs. She wasn't just floating in elite circles. She was born into them, but it was Pamela who interested me most. The deeper I went, the fewer details I found. No real job history. No clear business ties. Just donations here, sponsorships there. Everything vague. Everything clean. Too clean, until I found the podcast. It was an old episode from a now-defunct political gossip show out of Stamford. The guest, a former staffer for a disgraced mayor, was clearly drunk, rambling. But one name stuck out like a shard of glass. Everyone knew who was really pulling strings back then. The man slurred. Pammy Russo. Queen of the damn shadow game. Used to run the most exclusive little black book in New England. She knew what every man wanted, and how to make him pay. I played it back 3 times just to be sure. Queen of the shadow game, it sounded ridiculous. Until I ran a cross-search on event guest lists, foundation sponsors, and PAC donors in Fairfield County over the past 10 years. The same handful of names kept showing up, connected through obscure shell companies, and Pamela Russo was in the center of it all. Then I hit the real jackpot, an anonymous Reddit thread buried deep under a post titled, "Connecticut Secrets the Press Won't Touch." One comment caught my eye. If you've ever been to a networking party in Stamford and met a woman in a silk scarf with an old-fashioned wine glass, congrats, you've met the gatekeeper. Pamela Russo doesn't just throw parties. She arranges access. And nothing's ever free. There it was. Unfiltered. Unmistakable. Pamela Russo wasn't just someone's mother. She was a madam. A high-end fixer. The kind of woman who didn't just survive, she thrived in the shadows, building an empire of influence off whispers and desires people paid to keep quiet. She wasn't a victim of circumstance, she was the architect of her own kingdom. And now it all made sense. The money, the silence, the power she wielded behind velvet curtains and curated charity appearances. She didn't give me up because she couldn't raise a child. She gave me up because a crying baby didn't fit the image of a woman who sold fantasies to the men who ran cities. I felt sick. And electrified, because now, I knew the truth. She had built an empire on secrets, and I was the one secret she hoped stayed buried. But I wasn't staying buried anymore. Once I knew what Pamela really was, I stopped looking for peace, and started looking for proof. I couldn't accuse her of running a covert empire built on pleasure, privilege, and control without evidence. Rumors weren't enough. I needed a paper trail. And the irony? Pamela had left just enough breadcrumbs for someone like me to follow, someone with nothing to lose and everything to gain. I started with the charities. On paper, Pamela was the founder and executive director of the Russo Foundation for Women's Advancement, a glossy nonprofit with a mission to empower young women through education, mentorship, and community. The foundation threw glittering fundraisers every year, always co-sponsored by developers, political figures, and the occasional luxury brand. I pulled their 990 forms, IRS-mandated public tax documents, and started combing through the numbers. The donations were real. But the expenses? That's where the cracks began to show, massive consulting fees paid out to vague LLCs with no employees. Event planning budgets that ballooned by hundreds of thousands. Travel stipends that seemed to overlap with known political lobbying trips. I dug into those LLCs, and one by one, they led to mailboxes, shell addresses, and a tight cluster of names that repeated under different titles: Russo, Chambers, Ellis, Ford, and in the center, Juliana Russo, listed as a silent partner in 3 of them. Pamela had used her own daughter's name to layer legitimacy on top of laundering and influence. Brokering. The foundation wasn't a cause, it was camouflage, but Pamela hadn't counted on someone like me coming back from the past with a thirst for more than closure. I created a spreadsheet and started tracking every overlapping name, date, and fund movement. I spoke with a former intern at the foundation, someone who'd been abruptly let go after asking too many questions about donor access. I pieced together timelines from charity events and gala appearances, comparing them to news stories of zoning approvals and corporate mergers. The pattern was crystal clear: Pamela didn't just run a business. She ran leverage, and she did it with silk gloves and airtight silence. It would have been impressive, if it hadn't come at the cost of my existence. The more I uncovered, the less I wanted to confront her. No, I didn't want another cold glass of wine and a fake smile in that brownstone. I wanted the world to see her for who she really was. I wanted to take the curated mask she wore to every fundraiser and rip it wide open. Not with anger. Not with screaming, but with facts. So I made a plan. I contacted an investigative journalist I knew from school, Tasha Kelly, now working freelance, always hungry for a real story. I gave her everything: the documents, the connections, the tax filings, the names, and then I waited, because when someone like Pamela lives off reputation, the one thing more dangerous than scandal is exposure. And I was about to expose every layer of her perfect life. Getting close to Pamela without raising alarms meant becoming what she respected most: useful. After feeding the initial trail to Tasha, I knew a full exposé would take time. Pamela Russo's empire wasn't just built on silence, it was protected by layers of illusion, wealth, and carefully selected allies. If I wanted to take it all down, I couldn't just throw rocks from a distance. I had to walk straight into the lion's den, and make her believe I belonged there. That's when I applied to join the board of Bridgepath Youth Outreach, a flashy side project under Pamela's foundation banner. It was designed to give at-risk young adults guidance, but the real purpose seemed to be photo ops, grant padding, and feel-good PR. I played the part well: grateful, quiet, humble. I emphasized my experience mentoring teens through a local literacy nonprofit, true, though it had been years ago. I pitched a program expansion idea at the first open meeting. Smiles all around. Within 3 weeks, I was officially voted onto the board. The first time I saw Pamela again, I wore a tailored navy suit, conservative tie, and a name tag that read Eli Langley, Outreach Advisory. Her expression didn't flicker. Either she didn't recognize me, or she'd trained herself to pretend she didn't. I wasn't sure which stung more. She shook my hand like a stranger, but behind my handshake was a grip she couldn't feel, a slow, silent unraveling. I sat in on meetings where budgets were quietly shifted from programming to consultant fees. I took note of how the same contractor names were used over and over, always tied to her shell companies. I watched as guests at galas were ushered to Pamela personally, selective introductions that often led to new campaign donations or fast-tracked business permits. Juliana was there too. Polished, always smiling, always filming a social clip or prepping for interviews about giving back. It was almost laughable. I pretended to be inspired. Behind closed doors, I kept feeding Tasha names and dates. We worked in sync. She followed the money, while I collected the behavior. Memos. Calendar invites. Offhand remarks whispered after meetings. Everything was logged, but I didn't just collect. I adapted. I mirrored their speech. I stayed late. I volunteered for committees no one wanted. Slowly, the board began trusting me. Even Pamela, though never warm, began nodding in approval at my ideas. She saw me as an asset. The long game is patience. It's knowing you're sitting across from the woman who discarded you like a blemish on silk, and smiling anyway. Some nights, I'd go home and stare at my reflection, wondering if I was becoming like her. Cold. Calculated. Unapologetic, but then I'd remember who I was doing it for, not for revenge. For justice. She built an empire on shadows and secrets, and now, I was inside the walls, flipping the lights on, one room at a time. It started with a whisper, just one paragraph buried inside a midweek article by Tasha Kelly on a local news blog. Nothing flashy. Just enough to raise eyebrows. Sources within Bridgepath Youth Outreach reveal questionable consultant payments tied to shell companies. Some with alleged ties to high-level donors. The nonprofit, founded by Pamela Russo, has yet to respond to requests for comment. No accusations. No names beyond hers. Just enough fuel to spark interest, and it worked. By the next morning, the article had been reposted by 2 watchdog sites and picked up in a regional nonprofit accountability thread. I watched from my desk as our inbox at Bridgepath filled with polite, but persistent, media inquiries. Requests for transparency. Demands for documentation. Pamela, of course, acted unbothered. At our weekly meeting, she was her usual collected self, flashing a wine-colored smile, brushing off the story as clickbait. She even made a joke about hiring a publicist just to keep up with the drama. But I saw the tension in her jaw. The way her assistant hovered more than usual. The subtle delay in Juliana's usual posts about the foundation. They were rattled. Not broken. But the crack had formed, and cracks always widen. Over the next 2 weeks, more pieces dropped. One article revealed a $600,000 payment to a marketing firm registered to a post office box in Fairfield County, later linked to Juliana. Another exposed inconsistencies between tax filings and publicly reported donations. Tasha's writing got bolder. The quotes became sharper, and still, Pamela said nothing. The silence became deafening. Donors began to back out quietly. One high-profile sponsor pulled their logo from the foundation's homepage without notice. An anonymous source sent Tasha a scanned document showing internal memos from Bridgepath approving contracts without board review. My signature wasn't one of them, but I'd been in the room. I gave Tasha more. Carefully, strategically. Nothing that would lead back to me too soon. I sent photos of gala seating charts next to campaign contribution records. I uploaded a memo I'd accidentally been copied on that showed Pamela redirecting grant funds to private consulting projects. The press storm grew, and Pamela, she began slipping. Her responses at board meetings were curt. Defensive. She canceled 2 upcoming events without explanation. For the first time, her mask was cracking in public. Still, she never acknowledged the journalist by name. She never said mine either, but I knew she was wondering. The final spark came when a TV reporter, an alum from one of Pamela's networking circles, ran a 5-minute evening segment titled, "Charity or Cover-Up?" The Russo Foundation Under Scrutiny. The internet lit up, and in that moment, sitting in my car outside her brownstone, I realized something. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. This was about exposing what happens when power hides behind good intentions, and what it means when someone who was discarded comes back with truth as their only weapon. Pamela built her empire in silence, but I had set it on fire with a whisper. Juliana Russo had been raised in a glass castle, gleaming, polished, and high enough to block out every uncomfortable truth. Her life had always looked curated: private schools, internships handed down from family friends, interviews where she spoke in glowing terms about her strong, inspiring mother. She believed in Pamela the way a child believes in fairy tales, completely. Because no one ever told her to question it, until I did. The story had gone viral by then. Articles dissected the Russo Foundation's shady dealings, while local TV stations ran evening specials with stock footage of Pamela at fundraisers, smiling beside senators and CEOs. She hadn't made a public statement in over a week. And when I walked into the board meeting that Monday, her seat was empty, but Juliana was there. She looked pale, rattled. No camera-ready gloss, no #givingback charm. Just a young woman who didn't understand why her mother's empire was crumbling so fast. That's when I knew it was time. That evening, I sent Juliana an email. No subject line. No flourish. Just a single sentence and an attachment. You deserve to know the whole story, especially because you lived your life never knowing I existed, Eli. The file was a neatly organized PDF, my original birth certificate with Pamela Russo's name, timelines of her financial web, tax filings, donor records, and scanned emails linking her shell companies to foundation funds, all annotated with notes Tasha and I had compiled. But the last page was personal. A photo of me at 18. A copy of the adoption form. And a note, she gave me away. Then she built a life without ever looking back. I don't blame you. But I need you to know, the woman you think you know isn't just flawed, she's dangerous. And she lied to both of us. I didn't expect a reply. I certainly didn't expect the call. It came 2 days later. Juliana's voice cracked the second she said my name. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know, Eli. There was no defensiveness. Just grief. She told me Pamela had always brushed off questions about the past. That her father, some wealthy donor who had died when she was young, was the only man who ever mattered, according to Pamela. There had never been a mention of another child. I looked through everything you sent, Juliana said. And it all makes sense now. The money. The pressure. The way she controlled people. We spoke for nearly an hour. I didn't offer forgiveness. But I didn't reject her either. In some twisted way, we were both casualties of Pamela's hunger for control, raised in opposite corners of the same lie. The next day, Juliana posted something rare, an unfiltered photo of herself, no makeup, no caption, just the hashtag #truthmatters. Pamela must have seen it. But she never commented. For the first time in her life, Juliana saw through the glass, and the empire Pamela built with silk and secrets. It began to collapse from the inside. It happened on a gray Thursday afternoon, the kind that coats New Haven in a cold film of mist and memory. I had just left a meeting near Chapel Street, walking past the familiar brownstone-lined blocks, when I saw her, Pamela. She was crossing the intersection alone, her trench coat clutched tightly at the collar. No assistance. No entourage. No curated elegance. Just a woman in her 60s with shadows under her eyes and the weight of too many secrets finally catching up with her. She hadn't seen me yet. I stopped beneath the awning of a bookstore, half hidden by the glass. She paused at the corner across from me, waiting for the light to change. The street bustled between us, cars honking, strangers brushing past, but all I could see were her eyes as she finally lifted her head. And met mine. For a moment, everything else dissolved. No headlines. No lawsuits. No carefully constructed lies or polished smiles. Just the two of us, on opposite sides of the street, caught in the silence we both used as weapons. She didn't flinch, but I saw it, the recognition. The regret. The flicker of something that might have once been maternal instinct, buried now under decades of denial. She didn't try to cross. Didn't wave. Didn't move, and neither did I, because there was nothing left to say. She knew what I had done. The Russo Foundation had officially shuttered the day before. Donors fled. The IRS had launched an investigation. Tasha's exposé was nominated for a regional award. And Juliana had resigned from every board her mother had placed her on, publicly declaring her intention to rebuild her life. With full transparency, Pamela had lost everything but her name, and now, she stood staring at the one person who had taken it all away without ever raising his voice. I didn't give her anger. I didn't throw accusations across the street. I just looked at her the same way she'd looked at me the first time I stood at her brownstone door, like a stranger, except now, the power had shifted. Now I was the one with nothing to prove. The light changed. Pedestrians surged forward. Pamela blinked and stepped back, letting the crowd pass her. She turned without crossing, walking the other direction, her figure slowly disappearing into the mist. I didn't follow. I never would, because revenge isn't always fire and fury. Sometimes, it's quiet. It's the stillness after a storm when the truth has already been spoken and there's nothing more to be done. She had built her life on secrets, and I destroyed it with silence, not because I hated her, but because I refused to let her erase me again. In her eyes, I saw everything she never said, and in my silence, she finally heard it. If this story moved you, don't forget to like this video if you believe in quiet strength, comment below if you've ever uncovered a family secret that changed everything, subscribe for more powerful, true story narrations filled with betrayal, redemption, and poetic justice. Thank you for watching, and remember, sometimes silence speaks louder than revenge.